Shalom, everyone. Welcome to the second part of our day. My name is Michal Abramoff, and I am the Shlicha to the Upper East Side, working here at Park Avenue. The current situation in Israel has made my job more difficult, to say the least, but it also has given us an opportunity not only to dive deeper into our connection with the state of Israel, but also bring us together all across the Jewish world in asking, what is the future we want for the Jewish state? And I am honored to be here with you all to have this conversation and introduce our wonderful panel who will be discussing this. We have with us Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, the senior rabbi at Park Avenue Synagogue, and a leading voice in the conservative movement in the Jewish community at large, sitting in different positions across Jewish institutions such as JTS, ADL, UJA, and more. We also have with us Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, the senior rabbi at Ansche Chesed. He is also regularly publishes essays on Jewish thought and practice, and he serves on the Conservative Movement's Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. We are joined by Ayala Dekel. Ayala Dekel is the head of BINA secular yeshiva and is a published author. Ayala also developed the project that we got to enjoy earlier today, rethinking the way we see Megillat HaAtzmaut, reframing it as an inspirational and thought-provoking Jewish text, and has given multiple lectures and classes to high-ranking IDF officers, school principals, teachers, and many other. And we are honored to have with us Ambassador Asaf Zamir, Consul General to Israel in New York, representing the state of Israel to New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Delaware. Previously, he served as the deputy mayor of Tel Aviv City Council, and later on, he entered national Israeli politics as part of the Blue and White Party and served as the Minister of Tourism. Our moderator today is Rabbi Lori Kaufman, the Director of Content and Innovation at Park Avenue Synagogue. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here. And I look forward to hearing your conversation.
Thank you, Michal, not only for that wonderful introduction, but for all the wonderful work you do as our shlicha on the Upper East Side. I know the shlicha from the Upper West Side is also here, Gali, so we want to thank her also, as well as our partners, Ansche Chesed and BINA and the Jewish Agency. We have Osnat here from the Jewish Agency. So, and thank you all to our guests, both here in person and the many, many, many we have online joining us for this very important conversation. I'm going to begin by reading a paragraph from the Megillat HaAtzmaut, the Declaration of Independence. That's going to be the paragraph that we are going to be discussing here today. So I want to make sure everybody has, if they don't have the physical copy in front of them, they can hear it. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace, as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its citizens, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. So I'm going to ask my panelists here if there's one particular phrase from this Megillah that speaks to you, both in terms of your own vision of Israel and in terms of how you see it playing out today in what's happening today. Ayala, can I open with you with that question?
First of all, I'll say that before I'll talk about a phrase, maybe in the next question, I will talk about the whole Megillah. Now, I take this Megillat HaAtzmaut with me almost 10 years all the time, and I teach it in a lot of different...
Speak a little louder.
Louder, okay, sorry. Now, can you hear me? So I'm saying the Megillah itself as a vision, as an idea, as a subject, is the thing that I think we need to take now to our reality. Because the most important thing that happened over there, and Nir said about it at the beginning, is that they sat in the same table, with different opinions, and they agreed to agree. When they signed on this paper of the Megillah, they signed on a paper that nothing was written on it. But they had the trust with each other. And they agreed to be together even though they feel differently about the state of Israel and about almost every other topic that they had. And I think the most important words, Golda Meir, that signed on the Megillah and wrote the Megillah, she wrote them in her diary. And she wrote at the evening, after they signed on the Megillah, she wrote that they didn't know if they will survive to the next day. And they didn't know if the state of Israel that they just declared will survive this war that they were going through. But they wanted the words of the Megillah to be here for the next generation. So what they do after they signed the Megillah is that they took this Megillah and they put it in the safe of Bank Anglo-Palestina that was in these days in Rothschild, in Tel Aviv. And they said, even if we will not be here, we want the next generation to know the words, to know the Megillah, to know the vision that we had. And we're here, 75 years later. The state of Israel still exists. And we can read those words that they left for us, because we're the next generation. And I think the most important thing that we need to do now, and every time that I read the Megillah, I think that they wrote it during a war. And they arose from reality, and they looked far, far away to the future, and they saw a vision. And they worked really hard in order to change reality, and in order to get to that vision. And when we look at the Megillah today, we can say, first of all, we need to be here with different opinions, but also we need to rise up from reality, to look to the future, and then to go to that vision together. Even it will be a hard work, and will be difficult, and we'll have to put a lot of effort in it, but we can change reality.
Beautiful. Consul General Zamir, do you want to respond to Ayala or the paragraph and what it says and what you see happening on the ground today?
Yes.
And thank you for joining us, by the way.
My pleasure. It's my honor. Sadly, I can't speak as freely as everyone else in this panel. I have to watch. It's part of being a diplomat. And it's always challenging, and lately it's become impossible. I will say that growing up in Israel, the Megillah is our founding basic belief of how we visioned what Israel should be, could be, and hopefully will be. But when you read it these days, it's almost a frustrating procedure to see the gap between how it started out and what its founding principles were to some of the things we have to fight around and on today. And outside of this paragraph, there's one sentence, which I think is the saddest sentence, which is that until October 1948, we will write a constitution. And I think that they knew what they were saying, and you as Americans clearly understand the importance of having a document such as a constitution. And it is very challenging for Israel to govern itself without having a constitution. It has always been challenging, and it's becoming more challenging. And the reason that it's becoming more challenging is that Israel is made up of groups of people that see the world differently and vision Israel differently. And I always tell, I came to America 18 months ago. If I speak too much, tell me.
That's good.
I came to America 18 months ago, but I grew up here. When I was 4, we moved from Israel to Florida for 5 years, and I studied in the public schooling system of the United States. And that public schooling system puts all the kids together and teaches them the same story. You can like it or hate it, but it's a story. Then everyone goes home and does whatever they want at home. But they grow up, at least in the area I grew up, with a shared understanding of what this place is. We don't have that in Israel to begin with. Because one of the first things that we decided on around that time was we're going to have a publicly funded, separated educational system in which everyone studies alone, legally, surrounded just by people like them. So if you're an Arab in Israel, Muslim or Christian, you go to an Arab schooling system. You study in Arabic, surrounded by Arabs, and that's what you know. If you wear a yarmulke, you are sent to the national religious educational stream. It's public. You will study with religious kids. If you're secular, to the secular stream. And if you're ultra-Orthodox, Haredi, to a privatized yeshiva system, somewhat like here. During the time of the Megillah, the vast majority in Israel was part of one basic system, which was the secular main Mamlachti system. And the others were small, almost insignificant in numbers, streams. It was a way to do politics. Today, in the numbers, it's almost 4 different groups that vision Israel differently, that read this document differently, some of them that would never have written this document the way it's written, and without a constitution to lay back on. That is the basic reality in which we are, and these groups create what we now see in Israel, which is a severe identity crisis, in which if you ask any of these groups what our borders are or should be, you will get different answers. What the relationship between synagogue and state should be, you will get different answers. Or what constitutes our core laws in the lack of a constitution, you will get 4 different answers. And there is nothing binding to say, well, you can think that, but this is what we agreed on 75 years ago. That document, which could have been very important, does not exist. So for me, these days, even though it's not in the paragraph, that's the most important sentence which is relevant for our conversations today. If we weren't in a time of turmoil in Israel regarding judicial reform and changing the system, I would talk about freedom of religion, which is perceived very different in Israel than it is here, and creates a very different Jewish community in Israel than it does here. A very closed one, with only one kind of right Judaism, which actually lowers the number of people that engage in their Judaism, but also creates a gap between the 2 largest Jewish communities in the world. A gap that they see Judaism in a different way, which is also very challenging for coexistence and for a shared future. But that's where we are.
So, so there's so much to process and to talk about here. So the Megillah was a vision for how Israel should be run. It was, and even in this paragraph, it discusses the prophets as visionaries, right? So what I'm hearing from you is that it's not a shared vision anymore. There's disparate visions, and part of the problem and the fault lines that we're seeing is through the disparate visions instead of a single vision. And I guess the question is, when we think about both this paragraph but also the Megillah, is it living up to what we would think of as the vision? So, Rabbi Cosgrove, I know you were just in Israel a week or 2 ago, and when you think about Ayala has said about the words and the staying, keeping the words and locking them away, but here we are still. And what Consul Zamir has said about the different visions. What is your experience of the Megillah as we think about it as the founding document 75 years ago and where we are today in terms of its promises and then again its realities?
All right. Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for putting together the program. And just as this program is hosted at Park Avenue Synagogue, but it's a partnership with Ansche Chesed and Rabbi Kalmanovsky, it's such a joy to have the BIMA with you and with the Ansche Chesed community and BINA and NIR and the whole team and the Jewish Agency, and most of all, to have the honor of having the Consul General here. We're really just deeply honored by your presence. Thank you. Look, I just came back from Israel on the UJA rabbinic mission, and I'll just build on the Consul General's words. When we say the whole Megillah, when Americans, what's a Megillah? A Megillah is a story, right? And I think that story of the founding documents is being frayed and being argued, right? Israel is searching for its national story right now, and I think that we could attribute that, right? Whatever, I read these sentences, Rabbi Kaufman, as a series of carefully worded negotiations, right? It's a Jewish state, but it's also based on freedom, justice, and peace, right? Interestingly, I don't know, Consul General, is there a friend of mine on the trip said, what's the Hebrew word for democracy? And I think his point was that there's no actual Hebrew word, right? Conceptually, it's a Greek word, right, that has migrated in, but is that an indigenous thought concept within the Jewish tradition? Because I think the reason they say, as envisaged by the prophets of Israel, justice, peace, and free, right? So I think right now what's happening, what I witnessed is, what doth thou mean by a state that is both a Jewish state and a democratic state, which is really probably more of a Western concept than it is a Jewish concept. I think that the search for the story, perhaps it got us this far, to 75 years. Right? The irony of today's program is it was conceived as nothing to do with the present judicial reform. It was because it's Israel's birthday, and we're happy. And the story that kept us together, maybe we put aside our differences because of living in the wake of the Shoah. And now with the passing of the generation of survivors, right, that historical memory that allowed us to transcend our differences, maybe we've lost that thread. Maybe, as the Consul General said, 75 years later, right, we were tethered together, uncomfortably so, in all our differences, but those tribes of Israel, as the past president Rivlin said, is now being tested right now. But there's no one shared narrative, and I think that's why we're seeing what we're seeing on the streets of Israel right now.
Great. Rabbi Kalmanovsky, weigh in, please.
Say again?
I said weigh in, please.
Weigh in, I will. First of all, I want to say one thing. I'm also very happy to be with all of you, and I just want to note what a big fan I have been of BINA for all these many years. There's one thing that my friend Elliot Cosgrove and I have in common is both of our kids have studied at BINA, which we tremendously esteem this great institution. And one of the ways I just want to say to Ayala, the sacred texts that we have in Judaism, this is what binds us together around a Jewish bookshelf, studying together, arguing together, interpreting together. And the most important Jewish texts were not all written 2,000 years ago. They were not all written 1,500 years ago or 1,000 years ago in the Middle Ages. To be an Israeli and to find a way, I'm not an Israeli, but to find a way for Israeli Jews to discover what it would mean to them to be Jewish and not be siloed into orthodoxy or zero Jewish commitment. That's one of the things I admire so much about BINA. Okay, now to the question about specifically the paragraph. The paragraph that you read for us, Le'or Chazonam Shel Nevi'ei Yisrael, in which the state of Israel will be dedicated in the light of the vision, as envisioned by the prophets of Israel, is a little bit maybe less powerful than Le'or Chazonam Shel Nevi'ei Yisrael, in the light of the vision of the prophets of Israel, to be dedicated to Cherut, Tzedakah, V'Shalom. How do we translate? Freedom, justice, and peace. Those are incredibly lofty goals. They are in fact to be open to Jewish immigration, gathering of the exiles, protection of everyone's holy spaces, protection of everyone's conscience, language, and culture. These are not easily compatible. Okay, everyone who's discussed the challenges of the state of Israel know that being both Jewish and democratic is not so easy. I would say that the most important things that we could all aspire to be are actually beyond our reach. The most important thing that I as an individual, you as an individual, us as communities aspire to be, they're not easy. The tasks are infinite, and infinite tasks will always fail. Infinite tasks will always be only partially realized, because that's what it means to be infinite. Our power is finite, our responsibilities are infinite. And I would say, when I read a paragraph like this, of course it is evident that, is the state of Israel living up to this? No, and what country does live up to all of its aspirations? What country is not a work in progress? But one of the reasons that I will always be a proud lover and supporter, even though I'm not a citizen of the state of Israel, is because I think that the fight is worth fighting. The infinite task is infinitely good, but it's not so easily attainable. You mentioned about the Consul General mentioned about the value that we as Americans know how important it is to have a constitution, and it absolutely is. Of course, you also know that the Constitution was the second iteration, that they had an Articles of Confederation, which stunk and fell apart, and they had to do it again. And I sincerely, deeply, I say the following thing, truly with fear and trembling. When the United States was as old as Israel is, we had a civil war. Okay? The incompatibilities of American society produced terrible conflict. And you hear those words now in 2023 in America, and you hear these words in Israel as well. And it's, I think, the infinite task, but really you must aspire to these infinite tasks, but we must find a way not to have civil war. And we see at every level the kind of conflict that you were pointing to, the different tribes that really have not shared investment with each other. This is the most pressing thing to figure out ways to overcome.
So in this discussion, so Rabbi Kamenovsky, you bring
can call
up,
me first name. We've known each other a long time.
We're very good friends.
We're all
We're
friends, but we'll keep our titles.
Yes, we're good friends. So this tension that you mention, so the commentary, the way BINA sets up the discussion is they have the declaration, and then they, like a page of Talmud, they have commentary around it. And one of the commentaries is from Echad Ha'am, who talks about, we talk about the vision, like this is a visionary document, and the vision of the prophets and the aspiration, and how aspirational it is. And then Echad Ha'am also contrasts it with the priest, who has to deal with sort of the day-to-day, right? So I guess I'm curious to hear from everybody about this conflict between this document as a visionary document and how realistic it is in terms of its implementation in today's reality, not just because of the constitutional crisis, but because we're 75 years in, and the world looks a little bit different than when Ben Gurion was writing this. And is this still? This is not a question we had prepared, but is this still the right document? I hear you, yes, about a constitution, but is this a document? Is this the document that makes sense, today? And I would love to also get a little personal, and if there's there's something that personally you see or relate to, like a personal story about this, that brings it from the sort of intellectual conversation we're having to a personal conversation, a more personal approach. So Ayala, I'll start with you on that question.
I'll start. And first of all, I'll say freedom from Megillat Ha'atzmaut is the phrase that is most important for
Remember
me.
to talk loudly, Ayala.
I used to talk really.
I know. You have to project in this room, so yes.
So I will say freedom is the most important thing for me in Megillat Ha'atzmaut, and that's why I think Megillat Ha'atzmaut is very relevant these days. And I'll share a personal story. I'm today the head of BINA Yeshiva in Tel Aviv, but I was born not in Tel Aviv, far, far away from Tel Aviv, next to Ramallah on the mountains over there in a very Orthodox family. And I was born in the other side. And because I had freedom, I did the way to be in Tel Aviv, to be in BINA secular yeshiva. But it wasn't an easy way or a short way, even though it's only about 30 minutes between the place that I grew up at and Tel Aviv today. But we saw Tel Aviv as kids also from far, far away. It was the lights that we see over there, but it was a different country, like you said. We grew up in a different tribes, different educational system, different story, different narrative. And my dad did a feminist act when I was a really little child, and he took me to learn Talmud with him. Now I remember the room that we learned Talmud. It was a small, small room, and all those Aramic words above me. And I was really, really little, and all the men were there, and I was a little girl, and I knew that even though I love the Talmud, I will never be able to really learn the Talmud because I'm a woman. And that's not a thing that women do. Women that are getting married and they're having kids, but they do not learn Torah professionally. They can't be rabbis, and they can't learn Talmud. And only when I finished high school and I finished my ulpana, I could go and learn Talmud. And after a couple of years, I got married to a non-Orthodox guy, and we became a couple. And a year after, I took off my kisui rosh and became not
It's her head covering. I'm just
head
translating.
covering.
Yes.
And my husband put his yarmulke on, and he became religious.
Wow.
And we got married as a mixed couple, and we're still mixed couple. We're living mixed life, but the other way around. And my family is from both sides of political issues and religious issues. And my sister lives right at Hawara, and every time that there is something there, we're all calling her and making sure that she's okay, but she go through this place 2 or 3 times a day. And we're a different family. And each and every one of us think differently. And they voted really differently than I voted. But still, when my dad is in the hospital, we're all with him. And when we go for a vacation together, we manage it also with the pool and the men and women and how to do it. And we manage things together, even though we're different. So I'll be the optimistic one, because I have one leg in each part of the Israeli society. And I will say that, yes, different tribes, yes, different narratives. But if we take the prophecy and we look far, far away, we can be together as long as we feel as one family. And yes, it's not really easy. And each and every one of us have to compromise. Me and my husband, we have to have our life together, even though he will not drive on Shabbat and I will. How do we make a life together? We do. It's difficult, but it's more interesting. And the benefits for it is for the kids. They know that everything is okay. They know, really know from deep, deep inside that they can live in both different worlds inside of Israel.
Wow, great. Rabbi Cosgrove?
When I hear the priest-prophet, I hear about aspiration, as Rabbi Kalmanovsky said, and pragmatism of how does this happen. I want to share, you asked for a personal story, and I want to share an email that I received last night, to which I responded this morning. I'm not sure if I'll share my response yet, but it's really direct. So the Consul General, I know you're going back to Israel, and I see this moment, not just what's happening pragmatically in Israel about judicial reform, and not just what's happening, I see, because I read the papers, of a cooling of relations between America and Israel, but also the thing that I invest most of my time in as a congregational rabbi, diaspora Jewry and the state of Israel. Hi, Rabbi Cosgrove. I write seeking your advice. This is a member of our community. An Israeli friend of mine is trying to persuade me to attend a protest tomorrow in Washington Square Park against the reform efforts in Israel. While I too am against the efforts, I am anxious that attending a protest out of concern that it will be perceived as an anti-Israel protest. Wow. I know in your talk on Friday you mentioned the protests around the world, and I think I heard you share a similar concern. Can you please share your view? Do you think it is appropriate to attend the protest in New York? The lived life of a congregational rabbi. And I bring this up.
Raise your hand if you want to hear his answer.
I bring this up because I want everyone to appreciate that I'm not a constitutional lawyer, right? I'm not a voting, I didn't serve in the army, but there are real implications, and you have, right, the most interesting thing about my week in Israel was not what happened in Israel, it's what's happening here, that in Washington Square Park, in London, in Paris, in DC, you had people with Israeli flags, pro-Israel Israelis and diaspora Jews who love Israel, and in solidarity with the hundreds of thousands of Israelis on the street are protesting against this judicial reform. I don't know, Rabbi Cal. I have no memory of seeing Israeli flags, demonstrations, protesting against policy and the problematics this raises. So for me, sort of this practical question, right, of what does the leadership moment in this unprecedented moment mean? That on the one hand we love Israel, on the other hand the expression of that love of Israel may be to protest the machinations of this judicial reform right now. I could share what I said. Do you want me to share?
Yeah, of course.
It was quick. It was this morning on my way. Dear blank, it's so nice to get you always start with the warm stuff. It's a good question, one that I struggle with, as you heard on Friday. I think, I don't know if I should share this, but I guess someone else on this BIMA shared and got in trouble, so I'll do too. I think you follow your heart, and the stakes are manageable. If you go and find kindred spirits, you'll be happy you did. If you go and feel discomfort, you will know immediately and can head to a coffee shop, bookstore, or other New York experience a bit wiser. We're also having a program studying the founding documents of Israel this morning at 9:45 at Park Avenue. Should be fabulous. Warmly, Rabbi C.
Beautiful. Okay, Rabbi Kalmanowski is also a congregational rabbi. What's your take on it?
Okay, so it is a good question, and I am concerned about for all the reasons that you said. I'm concerned about the lack of a constitution and the sort of basic rules by which the government of Israel operates, and so I do feel strongly about the judicial quote-unquote reforms. But I feel stronger about something else that's going on right now in Israel, and you'll forgive me for being a little bit more harif, if so. And I think that this is part of what it means to refer to La'or Chazonam Shel Nevi'ei Israel, the prophets, the influence through the light of the prophets of Israel. I think there are senior ministers in the government who represent something that I think is a huge moral threat to the Israel that I love and believe in and support and want to build. And so I think that in addition to being worried about whether or not well-intentioned protests can diminish the overall sense of American Jewries and diaspora Jewries' connection to Israel, which I do think is a fair question. I have a friend who's one of the women dressed in the Handmaid's Tale. And she has the same concerns when she goes out in Tel Aviv. But I also think that people in our job need to help our communities and congregants think in a moral register about what's going on in the state. And the judicial quote-unquote reforms are really significant, but the rise to very, very, very significant power of people who really do not hold that the state should apply to all people, bli hevdel dat geza umin, do not hold in the same way to all people regardless of religion, sex, or ethnicity. I think it's a huge threat. And so I feel, some of you may have read about this in the American Jewish press, I do feel that it is appropriate, more than appropriate, I think it's an active good to say, I love this country, my Jewishness is indelibly connected to this country, and there are forces in this country that I think is appropriate to oppose. And so I think that's part of this moment as well.
Of course. Consul General, so you have been in the news lately about sort of being the epicenter of the priest prophet and expressing your opinion, and I'm going a little off script now, but also being called back to Israel for expressing your opinion. So when we look at these divisions and how we discuss them here in the diaspora and in Israel, and the ability to bridge different opinions, to the extent you can talk about how it feels to be in your particular position, I know we would all love to hear it.
Well, first of all, I have no problem talking about that. I'd rather talk generally about what everyone here talked about.
Please.
First, I think there's a difference. I have things to say to all of you.
Bevakasha.
Regarding what all of you said. I think there's a difference between ministers that don't share the general values of and judicial reform. I think there's a difference. I think there would be a difference in Rabbi Cosgrove's answer to the question, or not his answer, but his feeling, if there's a minister that is racist. First of all, because that doesn't always reflect on a whole country. That could be temporary. And in the grand scheme of things, or the question, when do I criticize Israel abroad without it feeding to my anti-Semitic opponents? Mm-hmm. For me, and everyone can have is entitled to their own answer, that's one of the moments where you say, I'm going to pray that this minister won't be a minister anymore, and that the majority of Israel will be smart enough to choose more moderate people to guide it. Judicial reform, in the way it's proposed, it's not a temporary issue. It's a change. It's a regime change that from that moment could permanently and forever create a barrier, an ideological barrier between the United States and Israel, and between American Jewry and Israel. And based on history, that barrier doesn't close back for a very long time or easily. So you see people protesting with flags over this that would never protest against Israel in any other case, no matter who a minister is or what a very extreme, horrible person said, or a variety of reasons. Because it's a problem. It's a problem when we're Jews overseas. We know that sometimes when we say things, they're used to promote anti-Semitism. They turn into violence against Jews in Borough Park We say something very nice here, and then a kid gets beaten up on the other side of town. So it's always sensitive. I got married a few years ago. Me and my wife decided to have a reform wedding. My wife wanted her best girlfriends to hold the chuppah. I had a very good relationship with Beit Daniel, the Reform Synagogue in Tel Aviv. We asked Meir Azari to be our rabbi. He married us in what we felt as Jews was Kedat Moshe v'Yisrael. And we were married, and that's it. It was enough for us. Years later, not many, I was appointed Consul General of Israel in New York, which entitles you, on the perk side, to a diplomatic passport, which I have to tell you, if you've never had one, I highly recommend it. It is a wonderful thing to have. And getting ready to go, I asked for a diplomatic passport for my wife as well. And she was not issued one, because in order to be issued one, she has to be my wife. And in order for her to be my wife, she has to have the word wife written in her passport, which she doesn't, because the country in which I got married, in which I was a minister in, a member of parliament in, did not acknowledge the freedom of my religion to marry my wife the way I wanted to. It was good enough to send me to represent the country overseas, but not to marry me. And when my wife entered here as the wife of the Consul General, she hates being called the wife of anything, but for that 1 minute she was the wife of the Consul General. She entered on her German passport as a tourist, because she did not have yet until I succeeded in explaining the situation to the American authorities. That's the reality in Israel today. So if we were to write this document today, sadly, it would have probably been much less enlightened, much less democratic the way I see it, if we'd have to make our agreements today. And my last point is, if we had more stories like your personal story, most people wouldn't be afraid of judicial reform. If we were one people and everyone felt that they understood each other and loved each other and knew what the other life looks like, we can go through many changes together without the fear. But the fact of the matter is that your beautiful personal story is extremely rare in Israel. And the more common story is the story I told of kids that go to different schools and don't know each other. And when you don't know each other, you fear the other. When you fear the other, you can never make joint decisions together. And all you want is to make sure your personal rights are concreted somewhere. And that's what we're seeing today. And when I was deputy mayor of Tel Aviv, I was in charge of education. And the project I was most proud of was called Chevruta. We took all the kids on a certain age group in Tel Aviv from different schools and made them study together for a year. Jews and Arabs, regular education, special education, migrant workforce, asylum seekers, north to south, everything, religious and secular, except for Haredi that didn't agree to take part in this. Because I think that if we create more people in Israeli society that understand the narrative of other people, then we'll be able. So I'm optimistic if that happens, and I'm extremely pessimistic if that doesn't happen. We're at a point now where the fear you're seeing in Israel and the protests, more than any other thing, are a result of that gap.
So we're really at time, but I just want to ask each of our panelists to have a final closing word. And if there's a wish or a prayer that or a vision that you have as we sit here today, what that might be. Rabbi Kamenofsky, I'll start with you.
No, go on. Start with someone else.
Okay, I'll start Ayala, I'll start with you.
So I think I'll take your words, and I think that it's really important what you said. And I think it's important both in the Israeli society and also here, the fact that we're sitting together and we're getting to know each other. That is really, really important.
It's a hasar shalach al ha-microphone.
Yeah.
שיער זה והיה.
Yeah.
And I will say that I think the most important thing for us these days is that usually we think that the power is in also, like leaders, they have the power to do everything. And I think that we see today in Israel streets, in Tel Aviv streets, that the power is not only inside the government. The power is our power as a nation, as people that want to be together. We have the power to change reality, and we can do it together. And sometimes you have to fight each other if you really love each other, because where do we fight? In relationships that were really, really close, and people that now protest, they love Israel. And I think that is the most important thing for us to do. Sometimes we need to say what we think, and we need to make leaders understand that they need to change perspective.
Beautiful. Rabbi Cosgrove?
Yeah. Rabbi, the problem is I might steal what you were going to say because Rabbi Kalmanovsky said that he laid out something inherently, there is something inherently aspirational about the Zionist dream, about any dream, but and that the project of state building did not end in 1948. It began in 1948, and so. And the catchword of the Jewish people, of the Zionist dream, is tikva, hope. And the reason we are where we are today is because the early Zionist builders of the state weren't satisfied with just hope and prayer, with the prophetic aspiration. That they actually worked, they argued, they built, and they operationalized a dream. And I think we got to keep working.
Yeah.
I think the project is just as relevant today as it was 75 years ago. And we can't take our foot off the pedal. And I think that's what's happening right now.
Okay. Consul General?
I'll connect to what Rabbi Cosgrove said. You have hundreds of years of history. You fought your civil wars. And you've shaped what you agree on today. You're still working, and it's still a debate. And we're only 75 years old. And we are an extremely complicated country. We're a complicated story. And the task of being both Jewish and democratic will forever pose daily moral questions that we will have to wrap our heads around and decide how to deal with. And it can go either way. The reason I said what I said last week, and I'm going back to Israel, is because I want to make sure I did everything I can to make sure it goes the way I think will make Israel continue to become something that we can be proud of, because we deal with anti-Semitism here a lot, and we deal with anti-Zionism here a lot. And I always say that Zionism is an extremely progressive movement. And if we didn't have our country yet, everyone would love us. And all the people that are extremely anti-Zionist now would be super pro-Zionism, pro-Israel, go over there, it's your eternal homeland, fight the good fight. But we succeeded. Not a lot of progressive causes succeed. And with that success comes responsibility, and we've been trying, and reality. The reality is the demographics of Israel. The reality is the neighborhood we live in. The reality is politics and social media and everything, and also things that you're dealing with. And we're in the midst of a very, very challenging time for Israeli society. And in that, I feel, especially after 18 months here, that you are a very important partner. Because we are one people and we do have a shared destiny and, of course, a shared history. And you do have a stake in Israel. So let's wish us all luck.
Rabbi Kamenowski?
So you did steal some of my. It was a double-sided bet because on the other hand I get to go last, so that's also good. What Elliot said is quite true. The watchword is tikva. It comes from the Ezekiel's vision of the valley of dry bones. That the dry bones said, "That's it. We're in despair." And avda tikvatenu, but of course our national anthem says od lo avda tikvatenu. It's not lost yet. And so we have to keep that sense of non-despair. Nachman of Breslau famously said, "Ein shum yeush ba'olam klal." There is no such thing as despair. Got to hang on to that, and it can be challenging because of all of the incredibly serious challenges that there are. It can be hard not to fall into despair. You must not fall into despair. You must keep going. You must hang on to the tikvah. Also, we've talked a lot about prophets. Prophets are amazing. Prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Micha, Amos, their words soar through the Hebrew Bible. Most of them were failures. They said, we're going to have a crash if we don't change. And what happens? They had a crash and they didn't change. They inspired society, but they didn't in themselves, by virtue of the vision, they didn't themselves transform society. And that's why the Talmud says, Chacham adif minavi. Better a sage than a prophet. Prophets can give you great messages, but they can't necessarily teach you how to put it into practice with wisdom and diligence and governance. The famous late governor of New York, Mario Cuomo, said, you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. Poetry gives you a vision. You can't go anywhere without a vision. But chacham adif minavi, a sage figures out a way to get it there. So I pray not only for the depth and power of our visions, which we have to have, which if we lack the prophetic vision, we're in deep trouble, but I also pray for the wisdom of the chacham who can turn it into reality.
Amen. Wow, amen, 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 and amen is what I say. I wanted just so much gratitude for our panelists, for your candor, your honesty, for our participants, for engaging in this difficult conversation and being part of it and being with us. For our partners, BINA, for the Consul General, for Ansche Chesed, for my team, Mara and Patricia, who make everything happen, and for all of you. We're looking forward to future programs together, but we're looking forward to the tikva of a shared vision and shared peace, and let it be Ken Yehi Ratzon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.